Well, this is very basic reinforcement learning. And reinforcement learning, as the Weight Watchers commercial put it, we feel good, we have an urge to eat. I'm using smoking here as another example because this same is true for smoking or actually any other habit. And then these get reinforced, feels good. So our brain lays this down as a memory and says, do that again. And so next time we see a cue, our brain, it triggers us to eat. So this can be positive cues, these can be neutral cues. So for example, if somebody associates smoking with driving to work, it can simply be that associative learning there. So that's actually more classical conditioning, but the positive and negative reinforcement specifically relate to reinforcement learning. Something stressful happens, we learn to eat chocolate, and so we feel better. And this reinforces that process. So I'm laying this out because as a scientist, this is really helpful for me to have a mechanism to test where we can take a model and we can say, okay, we can formulate a hypothesis that this is how this process works. And then based on that hypothesis, we can develop studies to test the hypothesis and see if it's true. As a clinician, this is also very helpful for me because I can see if this lines up with my patients' behaviors. So for example, my patients with alcohol use disorder, there's this saying, people, places, and things. If you avoid people, places, and things, you're less likely to be triggered to drink. And we can see how that fits with this model. And if we avoid these cues, we're less likely to be triggered. You can think of drinking as the behavior here. With other behaviors, such as smoking, it's hard to avoid all of the places that you associate with smoking. For somebody that smokes a pack of cigarettes a day, that's 20 times that they're reinforcing this process every day. And so clinically, we're taught to bring in substitution behaviors, such as, ironically, eating candy. So substituting eating candy for smoking a cigarette, which can be helpful for some people at helping them quit. Yet the problem is that neither of these dismantle this core loop itself. Now, I don't have a slide of this, but I'm showing you some references here that go back to the 1800s. In fact, I don't think I have the reference here, but Eric Kandel won the Nobel Prize showing that this process is evolutionarily conserved all the way back to the sea slug. So very well-known process, very worked out mechanistically. Yet these weren't the first folks to describe this. It turns out that the Buddha essentially described reinforcement learning back when he was alive, so over 2,500 years ago. And he described this as contemplating a process called dependent origination. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with this story. The word on the street is that he was contemplating dependent origination on the night of his awakening. It was actually what led to his awakening. He started to see this process himself from his own experience, and that's what helped him wake up. I'm happy to send it along, but I actually wrote a paper with a Pali scholar almost 10 years ago now, showing the parallels between these processes. And I also wrote a chapter in my first book, in The Craving Mind, that details this. It's really interesting that, the Buddha was really this, as Goenka describes him, a super scientist, and had worked out this process before paper was even invented. So I just want to highlight that historically, because we often privilege modern science over, quote unquote, ancient history. Yet, in fact, I don't know anybody that was a better scientist than the Buddha. He didn't have graduate students to get to do his bidding. He didn't torture lab animals. He just looked at his own mind and figured this whole process out himself. So I just want to highlight that.